Just before my marriage, I said to my wife, climate change is serious and real, and if we don't make enough progress by 2020, I want you to know I'm going to become an eco-terrorist.
If climate change isn't the biggest curveball we're all facing right now, I'm not sure what is. And while Dr. Saul Griffith hasn't quite become the eco-terrorist he threatened, he does have a rather bold plan to save both the planet and your hip pocket.
By electrifying one community, we can electrify them all. 2515 is really the prototype for the Australia we need to build.
I'm Kelly Reardon, and this is Curveball, the podcast where leaders reveal how they're tackling their biggest challenge. So, at a pub in New South Wales one night, a few locals got together over a chicken schnitty, and they were concerned about rising power bills and more frequent floods and fires. And in walked this lively engineer and inventor named Saul Griffith. A guy so smart, he's consulted to NASA and the US Department of Defence, and who now finds himself offering energy solutions to prime ministers and presidents. So over a beer, Saul convinced the locals to join him on this radical plan to transform the postcode of 2515 into the nation's first fully electrified suburb. So can he pull this off? And can he pull it off quickly? Saul, before we get stuck into your new book, Plug In, and this plan to go fully electric, I'm keen to hear how you developed this fascination for how energy works in the first place.
Yeah, the philosophy in our house was if it was broken, you could fix it. And even if you couldn't, you'd merely taken it apart and you'd learn something. My father was an engineer, my mother was an artist, and it was a very hands-on kind of household. So I do worry a little bit that we are losing the curiosity and we're losing the culture of repair and making things last a long time. The famous example or infamous example in our house is the clothes dryer that my parents, I believe, got for their wedding present, and my father dutifully made work for 35 or 40 years. I think to my mother was like, there's better ones now, can we have a better one? But my father relentlessly kept this thing alive, and I think that culture is going away.
You studied metallurgical engineering at UNSW, but you then ended up in the US, the prestigious MIT. So many geniuses have come out of that place. And you would have been there at a pretty interesting time. What was it like to study at MIT?
MIT was extraordinary, and for me it feels very lucky, like I entered through the tradesman's entrance. I went as a graduate student, and I just sort of made a relationship with a professor, and he took a punt on me, and it turned out pretty well. And I worked in a lab that was working on making electronic ink, which was the thing that ultimately became the display in the Kindle. Oh, right. And then we worked on the chemistry and the mechanical engineering of printing electronics and how to make faster, smaller electronics. It was a fabulous experience. I went there in 1998 to the US. I think that really, now I look back, in 2025, I still remember distinctly. For whatever reason, I was probably dating a Harvard girl or something. I was at the Kennedy School of Government for an election party in 2000 for the Bush-Gore election.
Wow. Which
was hung. And I remember, I'm just new in America and I'm Australian and I'm pretty clueless. And I remember everyone at the party just being shocked because that night, normally you have a resolution and then it was hung and then 30 days of tension.
Weeks.
What's going to happen? And then I remember also distinctly 9/11. So I actually was giving a talk at Harvard Business School, and I definitely was the only person there. I couldn't afford a cell phone, but everyone who went to Harvard Business School could afford a cell phone. So I remember I'm the lecturer and I'm talking to 200 kids, and then all the phones start going off and you hear people gasp and wail and walk out, and I'm wondering what's going on. And then that turned out to be 9/11. And I just think like those moments really stick with me, especially I feel America made a lot of poor choices as a result of those two events. And I think a lot of how we ended up with where we are now, things could have been remarkably different.
Well, Al Gore as president rather than George W. Bush, certainly on climate, things would look very different.
I don't think we would have gone into the Middle East the way we did, I think things would look markedly different on climate.
You actually won that MIT student prize for an invention there. What did you make, and then what did you do with the prize money?
I made a machine that makes eyeglasses. It was sort of like a 3D printer for eyeglasses. It was a pretty cunning machine that used membranes, and you could program them with pressure and geometry to make any eyeglass lens. And I won $20,000, which was basic, and a free set of tyres because it was sponsored by Goodyear. So
Really?
I didn't have a car.
You're having me on.
And I got to choose the most expensive. No, it's a great story. I got them to give me the most expensive tyres, even though I didn't have a car to put on. So I got like Pirelli P0s. And then, for whatever stupid reason, I mean, it was Boston, which is freezing cold, I decided to buy a Volkswagen dune buggy, which is basically a fiberglass spar on top of an old Volkswagen. And so I had $4,000 tyres on a $600 VW, and then $20,000 in prize money. Fulfilled a childhood promise to my mum and took my family to the Galapagos, which was extraordinary.
That's a once-in-a-lifetime trip, isn't it, to go
my
there?
sister came along. Turned out later that she wasn't seasick, she was pregnant. And some of my friends came along, and I just started dating my now wife, and her dad came along. So, it was an incredible natural spectacle to see all of those creatures there.
A little while later, I think 2004, you started Squid Labs in Silicon Valley, so other side of the country. Again, it's sort of an interesting time. It's when this whole Silicon Valley tech startup bro culture is sort of happening. What was it like to be there?
This was pre-bro.
Right.
This was where you could still move there, live in a warehouse, and not be a kid from Stanford with rich parents and start a company. We rented an old woodworking warehouse in the wrong side of the tracks in East Oakland, Emeryville, super cheap. I made an apartment in the attic, and other guys slept in the rafters, and we didn't really know what we were doing, but we just gave it a shot, and there were 5 of us. And we turned that into a bunch of different tech companies that we spun out of there. But it was still possible at that time to be pretty idealistic, live very cheaply, and work on big ideas where you didn't immediately need gobsmacking amounts of capital. They just had the dot-com bust in 2001, 2002, so it was getting going again, but it was an era before the sort of the hyperscaling mentality really kicked off. When we were working on the eyeglasses, we ended up starting a website that was do-it-yourself instructions called Instructables. That ended up being a nice success. We sold that to a company called Autodesk. For a brief minute, we were in the top 100 websites in the world. We felt a little bit cool. And then I started a company called Makani Power, which did high-altitude wind energy extraction. Ultimately, we got financing from Google to do that. And then we did a couple of other sort of little projects that came out. Those were definitely fun and interesting times. A bunch of us were kite surfers, and kite surfing was still fairly new. And
I mean, I'm kind of keen for you to take me inside these labs, because we hear about these labs or these workshops, but what are you doing? What does it look like day to day?
I was running Makani, and there was the global financial crisis, and our investors owed us $10 million, and then because of the global financial crisis, they decided not to honour their investment. I threatened to sue them, which, as the CEO of a startup, threatening to sue your investors is not typically popular. So I was relieved of my duties. I think, what's the polite term for it? I left to spend more time with my family on Earth Day 2009.
Fitting.
Very fitting. And I had a 2-week-old son. It was great times.
Oh.
And
first child, second child?
First child.
Okay, so there's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, economic universe is ending. And so it was instantly 2 of us just in hustle mode. And we all, actually 3 of us, and we all had young children coming, either just born or pregnant. And so we sort of shared a paycheck for about a year. And we wrote some software that we ultimately sold that was valuable in math and CAD tools for doing computer-aided design. And then we all wanted to work on climate and energy issues. So as well as doing those design tools, we were working on various technologies for climate and energy. But because it's the US, the majority of federal funding for research actually goes to the Department of Defense. And so as often as not, we would be telling the Defense Department that we were building them robots where the full intention was to use that robot to make better, cheaper solar energy. So we ended up doing a bunch of work for the Department of Defense. We ended up building exoskeletons for the Special Operations Command, that's SEAL Team 7, and a bunch of robots for DARPA, and solar energy technologies, wind energy technologies, heat pump technologies for the Department of Energy. That, in essence, was the seed funding for these startups we were building. And that would get the technology from, a very early, just an idea, and we tried not to start a company unless we had an equation on a piece of paper that we felt we understood better than anyone else. So our competitive advantage was better physics and better math, and that this thing would be a better, cheaper widget for what it was doing. And so when you're that early in what you're doing, venture doesn't fund an equation. Venture funds a product that is going to meet a market need. So the early work would be done on the government funding, and then we would get venture capital on the back end to finance those companies to take the robots to market, take the energy technologies to market.
Was that ever ethically tricky for you? And I don't mean to say you've done anything unethical, but like that idea that, okay, the Defence Force, we have to sort of get into bed with them and make them a thing in order to learn what we need to learn to then apply it in the climate space.
This is an age-old ethical problem that everyone who's ever been a scientist, most of the mid-20th century science was funded by defence issues. We drew a line at not building weapons that had that could kill someone, but it would be naive to believe that we weren't building systems that could be very, very easily weaponized. We built a lot of very advanced drones for their times, and we built drones that could drop a quote-unquote bottle of water and a cell phone very accurately, swarms of drones that could do this. And, that's getting perilously close to the type of things that are now dominating the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, it's such a conundrum, isn't it, for science?
It is a conundrum, but our governments don't wish to fund science for peace. So, and that's even more true in Australia than it is in the US. I don't think as a scientist it's worth walking away. It's worth lobbying to build a better society that funds things that are good for our people as opposed to good for killing people.
So tell me about then establishing Rewiring America. What was your goal, and what were you doing for the US government initially with Rewiring America?
So actually one of the first things we did when we started our lab in 2009 is that Congress had just funded a thing called ARPA-E, which was the Advanced Research Projects Agency for the Department of Energy. It was modelled on DARPA, which is the Defence Advanced Research Projects Agency. DARPA is famous because it invented everything, meaning the way they fund science is different to everyone else, and they have an extraordinary track record. So the internet, ARPANET, was what the internet was called before it was called the internet. That's because ARPA conceived of it and funded groups of people to work on building the internet. The autonomous car was conceived at DARPA. The humanoid robots were conceived of and funded by DARPA. So it's the GPS, most of space science. Like in 2009, ARPA was created, Department of Energy. We wrote a proposal to them that if you really want to do innovative energy and climate work in the US, you should understand the energy economy in excruciating detail so you know what to spend your money on. And so we proposed to look at all of the energy flows from where you dig energy out of the ground, in the case of coal and gas or wind or solar, how you extract it from the atmosphere, how it flows through transportation systems, household systems, commercial systems, industry, and where does it end up? And is there a better way to do that? We didn't get funded then, but eventually in 2018, we finally got funded by ARPA-E to do the work. So sometimes you just have to be patient. We did this really great flow diagrams, and the conclusion of that work is really that the only way to zero emission society is largely through electrification. So that research was the origin of the book Electrify that I wrote for the US. So that's happening in one piece of my life. Then the other thing that happened in 2008 is that I got married. Just before my marriage, I said to my wife, climate change is serious and real, and if we don't make enough progress by 2020, I want you to know I'm going to become an eco-terrorist because I know how infrastructure works, I know how to build drones, and I'll fix it. and she's at the time, in the throes of love and honeymoon, that's all fine, dear. Then in 2019, I'm like, look, we haven't made any progress on this. And so can I become an eco-terrorist now? She's like, no, we got 2 children. So she actually said, what you're always complaining about is the hardest thing of building your technology companies isn't building the technology, it's satisfying the regulatory problems and the policy goals. So why don't you actually go into policy and regulations, and that can be your outlet. And with that, I then met up with an old friend, Alex Lasky, and he and I were noodling on how to make heat pumps better for homes. But ultimately, we decided that what was necessary was to roll up our sleeves and build an advocacy group to tell the positive case for solving climate change. If we use these technologies that are now so much more efficient, it's going to improve air quality, it's going to improve public health, it's going to lower energy bills. And so as 2 entrepreneurs, we just here's this giant opportunity for the American economy to go to zero and get more efficient and all of these things. Let's start telling that story, because at that moment, it was the presidential candidates gunning for the 2020 election. And none of the Democrats or the Republicans at that time could say climate and climate solutions without grimacing. They all thought that it was sort of bad news to try and solve climate change. Because we had done the work with ARPA on all the energy flows, I was a little bit famous in very wonky energy nerd circles. I mean, 100 people.
Flowchart famous.
Yeah, flowchart famous. 100 people have looked at my charts,
they must be very complicated, though, right? That would be a very difficult task to map that.
It was it was super cool, super fun, and you learn, you end up with this incredible knowledge of the economy. Like 0.6% of energy is used to drive kids to school on buses, and 1% of US energy flow is actually using natural gas to pump natural gas through 1 million miles of pipeline, and all of these sort of crazy statistics on right down to how much refrigeration is used in what formats to get food from farm to table. When the Biden administration came in, they really hired an extraordinary team to work on climate within the White House, and that team reached out to us and we engaged with them and a whole bunch of other civil society groups also, so non-profits and others, to try and help of and conceive the big climate policy. And then the piece of that we were really gunning for and advocating for was the household-facing pieces.
And how responsive was the Biden administration on that? Because I think traditionally we've said, it's all these big polluters, the big, India and China should solve this problem. Individuals and individual households can't solve it. It's a macro, big factories, big whatever. How much did you have to flip that thinking to say, actually, on a household level, we can make a difference? It could lead to 30, 40% of a difference.
Not to have a dig at economists, but it is one of my favourite hobbies. You've highlighted a problem that really started in the early 2000s. So the IPCC was a bunch of scientists who said climate change is a problem. And then somebody had to figure out, well, what is the solution? The way the UN, the IPCC works, they don't really have engineers on staff, but they have tons of economists. So they handed the job to economists. And no offense to economists, but they don't really understand energy and energy infrastructure. And they sort of made this reasonable guess, well, we should go after the things that are the heaviest emitters first. And the heaviest emitters are the way we make electricity, and then industry, the way we make steel, the way we make cement. But that's really nearly all on what they call the supply side of the energy economy, where it comes from.
And your focus is the demand side.
Demand side is where you use it. But supply and demand are equal. By definition, you have to solve both of these things at the same time. And so what we brought to the White House was all of this data on what it looks like on the supply side, which is why we know how much energy refrigerators use and water heaters use and cars use. And we were able to help craft the piece of the bill that looked at helping consumers do their bit. And in the US economy, 42% of the emissions come from a small handful of decisions that households make at the kitchen table. What cars they drive, how they heat their home, how they heat their water, how they cook, and where they buy their electricity from. And so we worked on the piece of the bill that looked at how do you decarbonise all of that.
This is Curveball, and my guest is Saul Griffith of Rewiring Australia. In a moment, we'll take you inside his local postcode of 2515, where the locals are trying to become Australia's first fully electrified suburb. This is Curveball and I'm Kelly Reardon. My guest today is Saul Griffith. He's the author of a new book called Plug In, the Electrification Handbook. You know, the book is really great in that it is a handbook. It's written in a very conversational way. I can see you've worked really hard to make this a consumer-facing book that isn't, full of your engineer brain and stats and facts and things that normal mere mortals like me can grab onto. So congrats on that. There are these 5 things. Can you list out what those 5 things are that make a difference at the household level?
So I like to say, I want you to be worried about climate change. It's very real. It's a problem. It's going to be bad for our kids. And then I want you to hurry up and make 5 good decisions in the next decade. And what do I mean by that? So our hot water heaters, they basically die every 10 years. So you need to replace them. Our cooktops in our kitchens also only last about 10 or 12 years. Our space heaters about 15. Our cars last 10 to 20 years. So when those machines die in your life, if you get an upgrade and get the electric one at the end of your gas one's life, then you're actually not only going to decarbonise your home, help the country with its climate goals, but you're also going to lower your energy bills.
Which is absolutely brilliant, because I think what you're saying is even if you're on a low income, you're from a low socioeconomic background, you're not saying go and buy these 5 things tomorrow and spend $100,000 on them. You're saying make small decisions at the time in which the decision comes up.
Yep. My
hot plates are no good anymore. They're gas. I'm going to replace them with induction hot plates. And pretty much for all of those decisions, your water heating, your space heating, your cooking, those things I think are fairly affordable decisions. The EV, the electric car, is probably the biggest one and has been traditionally a bigger outlay, but even that's changing, right?
All of the solutions are falling in price. And we saw this Australian rooftop solar is the classic example. In the 1990s, hippies did it. It was super expensive and they were living off-grid in Nimbin and they were smug about it. Mid-2000s, it's starting to get close to being economically viable, but it needed the incentives that the government put in terms of a rebate. It was very sensibly designed to age out. So by 2030, once the market got cheap, then the rebates go. And they also had feed-in tariffs. So that got the market started. That helped us train a good workforce, and the cost of rooftop solar just fell and fell and fell and fell. And now, if you put rooftop solar, and if you can put rooftop solar on your roof, it'll be 5 to 8 times cheaper than electricity you can buy from the grid. Everyone knows the retired engineer who shows them the app on their phone about how much they saved on solar today. That's happening now with the cars and with all the other pieces of kit. And that, I think, is great. So we're finally starting to get through the culture wars and into the positive cultural reinforcement. Like, these are decisions you can make. They're going to be good for you, and the community is advertising for you. We did predictions of the prices of electric vehicles coming down, and they've all beaten it. So they're getting cheaper faster than anyone in the world expected. It's pretty extraordinary.
You also talk about tradies being the hero of this sort of electric revolution that we're trying to start in this country. So more jobs for Aussie tradies. But tradies, I have to say, they're both hard to come by. Anyone who's trying to renovate a home right now will say it's really hard to get one. But I actually think they often don't believe in the new products. So I was one of the people who had my house flood in 2022, and I wanted to build back better and be more flood resilient. Mine was a freak occurrence. I'm not on a floodplain, any of those things. But if you're going to build back, why wouldn't you do it in a more resilient way? But they just came and made that very difficult. So they would poo-poo the water-resistant insulation I wanted to have, or say it's a waste of time to put fibrous cement as your floor or your wall. I found it hard to get the tradies on board with the new product. So is that a challenge for electrification? That they don't know the products, they're not out there selling them to people?
Absolutely. People want to make people like Tim Flannery or people like me or people like Claire O'Rourke or others the climate heroes, but the actual climate heroes are going to be the tradies. Like, I'm not going to put the solar on your roof. Don't trust Saul Griffith to wire up your basement. So the tradies are going to get the job done. And don't get me wrong, there are some extraordinary tradies in this country who are completely on this program. And there's a great tradie I interview in the book Plug In. There's a few, but Bryn, I love. He's actually installed 135,000 solar systems. He does batteries. He does heat pumps. As a side gig, he sells and rides electric dirt bikes. Like, this guy's all in. He's fantastic. But that's not all of the tradies in the country. He happened to build his business and build a very successful business model selling what he's selling, which is electrification. Other tradies that are a little older, they're selling the legacy product. They've had a business that's running for 25 years that does it.
They know how it works.
They know how it works. It's very easy to do. It's predictable for next year's income for them. And then they're still hiring some apprentices, and then they train those apprentices in the old ways. And I have nothing against these people. We should give them all a huge vote of thanks for keeping the country running all this time. But we do need to help them transition to not selling against the program, but working for the program. I think there's ample opportunity for training programs, government and otherwise, to help onboard them. There's increasing awareness, especially among the younger tradies, that we've got to solve these climate problems. So I think we're in a little temporal problem where it's a mixed bag. I live in a little community just north of Wollongong. Our postcode is 2515. We got 4,000 households, 10,000 people. We spend 25 odd million a year buying petrol. We spend another 5 or 6 million a year buying natural gas. That money we spend leaves our community on a one-way ticket. It employs two pretty miserable looking people at the BP who sell you three things that can kill you: cigarettes and sugar and petrol. But it's not a big job creator. It's not really good for community economics because the money leaves immediately. In nearly every Australian community, half or more of our energy, including to drive our cars and including to do all the things that gas does, can come from our rooftops and from the commercial buildings and from solar within your community. And so if you sort of model what that means, instead of spending $28 or $25 million a year leaving the community, we could be saving about $20 million a year in our community when we get to all electric. When you do that, part of the reason you're doing that is you're employing a whole bunch of these electrical trades and other trades to do all the work. So this is the thing that does create jobs in your community. But even better, a community that's saving $20 million very likely spends about $12 million a year, because we spend 55% of household spending in our local LGAs. So the big job creator isn't even the tradies, but the apex predator of the job creation. And then all of this money that the households save and spend in their community is going to be jobs in cafes and restaurants and art centres and the other things that build real community. So I think there's an opportunity to change the narrative here, make the tradies the heroes, and they can be pillars of the communities as we decarbonise and make our communities more resilient.
So can you take me inside that very first meeting that happened at a pub in your community? Who was there? Who turned up? And how did you pitch this vision?
We've got a pretty fabulous community with some what you might call traditional environmental ratbags. And they were the local chapter of Extinction Rebellion. Extinction Rebellion was this protest group started in England, and they're the people who throw red paint at famous paintings
and stop the harbour bridge and
do things that you know some people may have affinity to, but not to everyone's taste. And they posed a totally reasonable question. A, doesn't feel like this is getting us very far. B, it's pretty hard to take, because we've got young children now, it's pretty hard to take your 4-year-old in your backpack and throw red paint. So what do you think we should do if we want to have a big impact on what we believe is the issue of our time? And I agree with them, the issue of our time is addressing climate change quickly and fairly. And I'd just been working on all the Inflation Reduction Act, all the stuff in America, and it was clear that what we needed was somewhere in the world to show the way. They call it in the US a lighthouse project. Here's the light on the hill. This is where we're showing you everything working. So I just suggested to them, why don't we try and make our community here like literally a magnet for electrification tourism, where people want to come and see why we have life so good and how we got to this zero emission happy community. There was not much more of a pitch than that. Then that was enough that they signed up to help. And I remember they actually went and door knocked every household in the community, took their little kids with them. That was a better thing. And sort of tried to sign up the community. Who's in? If we try to do this project, if we try to electrify together, who is in? And we got, I think, 40% of the community committing to sign up. That was pretty good on our first pass. And then it took us a couple of years, but we converted that into some federal funding and a partnership with a finance company and a partnership with a local energy company to actually do this. We're now in process of doing it. We've sort of done our first 60 homes, which is like a trial run for how this electrification goes. We're collecting statistics and doing some science on how it all works. And hopefully in the next 18 months, we'll bring about 500 or 600 homes on. It's having a pretty interesting knock-on effect. It's a pretty small community where you see most people every day, or at least it feels like it. We found that a lot of the wealthier people said, well, actually, we'd like to pass on. We're going to do it ourselves because the economics, we can afford to do it and the economics work. So they're passing on the subsidies down so that we capture more of the community and more of the strugglers in the community. So a lot of really nice things are happening around this.
How much of that is a problem in terms of renters? You don't always have control of what hot plates you have or how they're going to replace the hot water system when it breaks down.
You can't solve climate change if only the wealthiest half do it. You can't half solve it. So from the beginning, the mandate for Rewiring Australia and all the work we're doing is figure out how to do this for everyone. And, the top 1 or 2% of Australian households, they can pay cash, or as the rude way of saying it, if they're not doing it already, they're just planet fucking hypocrites. So anyone you see driving a brand new Range Rover, you know that they could have bought an electric car, electrified their whole home, put solar on the roof, gone to zero emissions, and still have enough money to send 2 Sprog to private school.
Yeah.
And then I think the next 10 or 20% of Australians are capable of doing this when they refinance their home or they move, and it's doable with bank financing.
It's not expensive if you're a middle-class person.
Right. But we have a vanishing middle class. We have a housing crisis.
Correct.
I think the bottom 20% really struggle. The only mechanisms there is to do it through social housing. And then the 60% in the middle of that are struggling and probably don't have access to the credit. So Rewiring Australia's mandate is to work on big picture policies that can help address the renter problem or the lack of credit problem or the finance problem. Some of the large home builders are going all in and now coming all over the electrification side, so it goes both ways, but there is still industry resistance and there's ample opportunity to improve our building standards, not only on the electrification but also just on the quality and the insulation.
How can we get this concept to catch on? What other communities are now doing this, and how is it sort of snowballing into this contagious movement that's not just happening in your postcode of 2515 but elsewhere?
So I spent yesterday in Noosa talking to Zero Emissions Noosa, and they are trying to rewire Noosa, and there's a wonderfully passionate group of people. I spent this morning talking to a group of people who wants to do the same in Maroochydore. We're seeing a race to the top dynamic now, and there's a bit of competition, like which community can get the better local electricity regulations first and which one can convince council to do this thing or that thing first. So there's a positive dynamic. This is not to besmirch anyone I just mentioned, but I also think the movement is starting to be a bit less earnest, which I think is really healthy. I think forever climate people are earnest. And I think finally we know we're on the side of fun. And like even the fact that, like my solar installer, Bryn, is like, it's kind of interesting to talk to him about solar, but when you talk to him about how much better electric dirt bikes are than petrol dirt bikes, like that's the true passion. And so I feel like, Australia is actually going to get over the culture war and we're going to ride electric jet skis and electric dirt bikes into this better, cleaner, zero emission future. And a little bit of that, bringing a little bit of mischief and joy in, I think is going to be really important. I think this community economic story is hugely powerful. Like we all know that the systems aren't quite fair right now and we're spending money on, a lot of our money goes to monopolies that feel unassailable. This is our chance to claw back from those monopolies, community economics, And it's the biggest opportunity for redrawing the economic of Australian communities we've had in 100 years. So I think we're going to win by being a little more lighthearted and people like, oh, they're on the winning fun team. They're having more fun than us, so that's good. But then also like this is how we build community and make the economics of our community work much better.
How much of the community spirit and the fact that everyone's getting behind this in 2515 has helped your psychology? Because you've been at the coalface of, the policy. You're sitting in the White House dealing with the Biden administration on policy. You're looking at inventions that can work. You're talking to the Australian government. But in the quiet nights when, you and when your wife is sitting down and you're thinking about the future and it could be easy to feel a bit despondent. How much of what's happening in your community is helping your psychology?
It's pretty dark. I mean, the world looks pretty dark out there right now. Nearly all of the work we did under the Biden administration has been overturned, and it's actually been turned into a witch hunt. So actually Rewiring America is being investigated by the FBI, and they froze our bank accounts and they cancelled our treasury contracts, and these things will probably end up, we are suing and fighting back, and it's very American. Let's now spend money suing people. It's dark over there, and then Trump is using the tariffs to force the rest of the world to buy American gas. So this is the revenge fantasy of the gas industry, is what we're seeing unfolding in the US. So there's ample reason. I've had to lay off a lot of people this year in the US because they also cancelled all of our research contracts. Anyone doing solar, wind, we're moving our wind energy startup from California to Norway because it's just done in the US. So plenty of reason for despondence.
Yeah.
But absolutely find a huge amount of energy, not just from my community, but the other communities I'm visiting. A lot of people sort of like, oh, why are you doing a book tour to, visit these little communities up and down the coast? That doesn't seem like the best use of your time. I think it absolutely is. We need to get the only really powerful, pervasive political movements start at grassroots level, and we're seeing this happen at grassroots level. It's really kind of magical, and my wife loves it, so it's always good to get positive feedback from your partner. She actually a few years ago decided to retrain as an adult to become a librarian. Her theory was, world's going to shit. When the world's going to shit, you need your community to have your back, and who is the center of the community if not the librarian? So she loves it, and we both really feed off the spirit of community that's coming from it.
It's possible that COP31 will be held in Australia next year. It might be
Fingers crossed.
South Australia, so yeah, pretty exciting. If the whole world lands on our doorstep next November, what's the one thing that you want the world to see about Australia and the way that we're handling electrification or climate change solutions?
I said a little bit earlier, Australia is lucky. We have a lot of solar, but we don't have that much more solar. There's a whole bunch of other countries that have as much sun, but you don't even need as much sun as we have. So this even works in New Zealand. And we all think, one of my friends joke, it's the North Antarctica. But even there's enough sunshine for this to be true. But you get rooftop solar cheap, you get the batteries cheap, the EVs cheap, and for the portions of the economy that are residential and commercial and transportation, the whole country just saves money if they do this. And so we're proving this out here, and I do this modelling economically for countries all over the world, and we're actually trying to kick up an effort for rewiring the whole world so that civil society and governments everywhere have access to this so they can rebut the gas industry that tells them otherwise. Look, Australia would save close to $2 trillion by 2050 if we went all in on this program. Like
trillion with a T.
Trillion with a T. We can afford to do this. We have $4 trillion sitting in super funds that could finance us to save that $2 trillion. Like, this is a good idea. And I would like the rest of the world to recognize that, it is actually a good idea. China's doing it, Australia's doing it, New Zealand's doing it. It can be done in different places, and it improves health outcomes, improves economic outcomes, improves comfort. Like, this is just, I want the rest of the world to take home that idea. That's really important. I think nice if they see this sort of grassroots political power, to be honest. So we're doing okay at electrifying our local community. But I think the really beautiful thing that's resulted from 2515 is we've made the politicians take notice. Oh, this looks like it might be popular. This might be a thing. And I think that is changing the politics in very positive ways. And I'd like the rest of the world to see that. And then I also agree that the near-term opportunity for Australia is this one. It might take a decade, but the 10-year out opportunity is electrifying our industry and becoming an exporter of green metals, green iron, green steel, green aluminium, green lithium, green copper, green nickel. We have it all. And we have a huge amount to offer the world in powering our way through this transition. There's a really good international trade story that's a counter-narrative to the crap that's coming out of Washington. And I think that's another opportunity for us to emphasise at COP.
Would you take a bunch of them down to the Illawarra?
We've been doing electrification tourism for a couple of years now, bringing over Americans. We had Jay Inslee, who was a presidential candidate in 2020, come and visit, and a host of other Americans and some Europeans. So we're already doing it, and we are already in discussions with the global climate philanthropists about doing a hell of a lot of it for COP31.
Well, congratulations on Plug In, the Electrification Handbook. And I'm really excited to see what you do with Electrify 2515. Thanks for being on Curveball.
Thanks for having me.
Saul Griffith is an engineer and the co-founder of Rewiring Australia. The new book is called Plug In, the Electrification Handbook. It's very easy to read, easy to digest. I can recommend it. And you can find out more about that project in his hometown in the Illawarra if you head to electrify2515.org. Curveball's a production of Dead Set Studios. We recorded today on the lands of the Turrbal and the Yagara people. We pay our respects to First Nations peoples who've told stories on these lands for thousands of years. Rebecca Livingston and Sarah Dabro produced this episode, with editing from Amelia Navazquez. To suggest a guest or listen to more episodes, just head to curveballshow.com.